Welcome to the 5th episode of Toots Your Own Horn, a podcast series documenting the creation of a new kind of classical play festival featuring female playwrights. I'm Alex Karolyi, the artistic director of Shadow Path, a theater company that is researching and exploring how to produce this festival known as Theater Out of the Shadows. This episode will check in with our next batch of brainstormers as they share ideas on festival programming. As well, we'll meet our next slammer, Marjorie Chan, in our industry slam session as panelists discover how Marjorie is breaking new ground in the Canadian performing arts scene. We'll also review another 4 classical plays as we consider programming for our 2021 festival, Theater Out of the Shadows. Now we go back to November 6th, 2020, where Dainty, Deanna, T, Malika, and Monica chat with Maissa and myself about creating a new kind of classical play festival. So amongst us here this evening, we have quite an array of different artistic disciplines, from playwrights to performers, to producers, to directors, to storytellers, to comedians, to arts managers, to filmmakers, to founders. Question number 1, how can we leverage a classical play festival to build continuing opportunities for female artists?
I like what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing, putting female voices in these festivals. So not just as writers and playwrights, but let's hear from the directors and the costuming and the SM design and lighting design and prop masters and producers and your committee and every single role that requires like a play to run. Put females in those seats and let's just see how amazingly that show will turn out. Another suggestion I thought of was have like a best of, like award ceremony after the festivals and recognize that outstanding work and people can leverage that and maybe privately like invite industry folks to come and see the shows, like people who have hiring bodies within their theater company.
I think it's creating a space for the artists that are going to be performing or showcasing at the festival to also have a networking opportunity in a way. And I hate using that word. It's a little bit of an icky word for me, but it might translate to more jobs, more opportunities post this festival.
The different plays can be interpreted in different ways. I'd like to see different directors tackle the same play. So have a night where the same play is done 1, 2, 3, 4 times with different directors, different casts, and see how it evolves and how it's different. And you give lots of different artists an opportunity to play with the same work.
We can have casts from different walks of life and like lived experiences and their interpretations of these shows. And then having each of them have a space to talk back with the audience. And having that space of just like creative energy and figuring out what still exists as problems for women today and what have we moved forward from and how much have we moved forward, right? And have we moved forward at all? Can the actors and the creators and the women in these projects be the archive themselves? Can they be writing pieces of reflection while they're working on these projects, while they're working on the festival? And can those personal narratives be a part of the archive of the show?
I would also suggest having intersectional feminism and Black and Indigenous and POC representation, reflection being absolutely woven into the narrative and the fabric and the framework as to how festivals are made. Everything from the people who hire, the people who are behind the scenes, on the stage, even so much as when you go and do advertising and promotion, like where you promote and where you advertise, because that in and of itself is outreach.
When I hear the word classical play, as an immigrant and English is not my first language, it's scary to me because that means that the language might not be an English that I understand. And thinking about what is a classical play in a way that what is a classical play to you and what is a classical play to other people from different communities. I always question what makes something classic? Is it time? Is it how great it is? Is it because a bunch of white men sat down and said so? When you start questioning first, what is a classical play? Then we can actually start reinventing what you want your festival to be when you say this word.
Later that month, the script reading committee shared their thoughts on the programming potential of 3 more classical plays. I thought we would chat first about Elizabeth Robin's 1907 play, Votes for Women.
Historically, this would be an all-white cast, but then I think it would be interesting to not do it with an all-white cast, but then also that would leave room to have an open panel discussion about like women's suffrage and who it included and who it didn't include, because it wasn't all women who got to vote here, even though it seems to talk for all women. So that was an interesting thing in my head where I was like, are you gonna go with an all-white cast? Because no.
What I was taken by was how strong the fight was. Like, it's one thing to hear about it, but it's a whole other thing to be transported to that time. And I think it's an important play because it's about votes for women, but about how we have to fight here in society for the underling, whoever that is. I think it's continually relevant.
It was educational because I don't know the details of the suffragette movement. This was written 10 years before the women had the vote in England. So I think that's very, ahead of her time in that way. It's a political play, but it's also personal because it has this personal relationship with the guy, which moves the plot forward. And it also, I think it is relevant today because something that I found was very parallel was this whole concept of how like the women had to fight so hard to get the vote. And they were constantly up against a complacent body of governors, right? Or politicians or whatever. And people kept saying, it's not ladylike, and just wait and be patient, and one day you'll get what you want. But that's not the way it works. You can't wait around and hope for other people to give you your rights. You have to keep going. And I feel like even just recently with movements of late, we've seen a lot of criticism about, they didn't have to go about it that way. But yeah, you do.
I thought that the characters really, really stood out individually, like their classes, their upbringing, just their political stances, where they were all just from their vocabulary and the style of speech. So I thought that was super cool. I thought that it was a little long, which was mainly the issue that I saw for the festival. The relevance is obvious there, even just when they're talking about the pay, I was like, oh wow, and 100 and something years later.
Moving on to the second play is a play called Episode, written in 1928 by Eulalie Spence.
I liked it, and also I didn't like it. Even though I thought they were hilarious and honest, I didn't actually really like the characters, and I especially didn't like the husband and wife. And that ended up kind of taking me out of it a bit because I didn't care.
On the plus side, I thought that this was an African-American Black story that didn't deal with any type of repression, didn't talk about skin color. I think often we can just worry about those kind of tropes when it comes to people of color. We put them in these little boxes, and this is the only box that you can live in. You can only talk about these subjects. So I did appreciate that this was outside of that box.
This piece to me is relevant because it's timeless. Her work is not political, but also not particularly apolitical, because you can tell from the tone and the life and the character that they are certainly from a certain culture, and she's very specific with the language. And they use the term of underscored race consciousness, but at the same time, she's a believer of using universal everyday life theme that everyone can understand.
I found it predictable, and I couldn't root for anybody. I just was like, oh man. But I really like same what Jillian said, that we have a BIPOC writer, and there was no axe to grind. It was a domestic slice of life, and yes, they have those problems. It's so anybody can relate to those problems.
The thing about this play, and I read quite a few of Eulalie Spence, and I kept coming back to this play. It's a play for me that when I first read it, I kind of dismissed it. I was like, sure, whatever. But then it kind of stays with you. And I don't know why. I think about it a lot. And the thing I kind of like about this play is it's so different from, most of the plays we've read are very intense. And I kind of loved that this was, like, as Maissa says, a slice of everyday kind of universal life. I think the playwright herself is really an interesting study. I think she is a huge influential dramatist because she created this style, which she calls folk drama, which is kind of like everyday drama. As a Black playwright, she didn't want to use the theater to be political or to write race plays. And she often felt outcast from the Harlem Renaissance, scene and the other playwrights. The last play, which is Heart's Desire, written in 1943 by Jiang. And I should say that this is only the first act. Only one act has been translated from this. I believe it's a 3-act play.
I read this play in Mandarin a while back then and absolutely loved it. My first reaction was that in reading the original, it goes like that. And then when I read the English version, I feel like, oh, Act 1 already seems so long, but I didn't think anyone else reading it would feel like it's necessarily relevant or relatable because of the time period and the certain cultural specific thing. But at the same time, I feel like that's part of the reason that it's relevant. I often find we're so used to talking about 1950, the style is this, 1960, the style is that. And without realizing that is a timeline, a style existing one place, which I think it would be very interesting to see if you line out all the 1930s play from a Black female playwright, from an Asian female playwright, and then a British female playwright. And then you see what they're writing about, what their language, what their aesthetic rhythms, that's all going to be completely different. And I think you can talk about that and people will say, okay, I get it. But until you can show that, I think that's the only way you can actually change how people like actually believing in it instead of just mentally like, I know there are different cultures, but I feel like they need to feel the play. And I'm still not sure whether or not it should be done in like a brand new English translation with the tone trying to be coached into it, or it should be done in just Mandarin with English subtitle. Then you just hear how it naturally sits.
The one on the question, is there something you didn't like about it? I just said the translation to English clearly doesn't do it justice. Like it's so evident because I was like, it's funny. Like it's funny and the relationships are so good. I love the husband and wife so much and like just how they're dealing with each other. And it's like, she's so underhanded, like tricking her husband and like the way they play in front of Miss Lee and then the way they are with the aunts and uncles. Like I thought it was really, really funny. Or I thought the ideas behind it were really, really funny. You could tell it was funny, but then the translation was kind of like, it was just awkward.
This is a perspective that I just don't see. Like the way they described the family, like first, second, like it was all really interesting and cool. And their attitudes, like how this family does and that family does. And I know all families and all cultures are different, but it seemed like it was very specific and brand new. So I really liked the window into it as only a single act. Like I was just hanging there.
I said there's a fascinating family structure that I know absolutely nothing about yet for sure. I totally recognize the matriarchal, like manipulative figure. I also found the trope of like this orphan that has nowhere to go and people trying to like shove that off. That's for sure a story that I've seen in other places. And it was so exciting to see it in a culture that I hadn't seen that represented in before. It's so exciting to me that there is the possibility that this could be done. Like even if you started with maybe worked on a better English translation in the beginning and then did the rest of the play in Mandarin, how exciting is that to see when you get to know the characters and then also hear it in the language and the actual rhythm of it. I know that whenever I've traveled to places, I've gone to see theater there. And even though it's in a language that I don't speak, I'm always amazed and so inspired by how much I understand, just by the actors themselves and just the way they're conveying the story.
Just before the holidays, we were fortunate enough to meet with artistic director, playwright, and performing artist extraordinaire, Marjorie Chan, to better understand her challenges and successes in the Canadian theater industry. Marjorie is a multidisciplinary theater artist working as a playwright, librettist, director, and dramaturge, and also artistic director. A 9-time nominee, Marjorie is the recipient of 4 Toronto Dora Awards. In 2005, she was named the K.M. Hunter Theatre Artist, an Ontario-wide award for mid-career artists. In 2017, she was awarded the George Lescombe Mentorship in Theatre Award from Toronto Alliance for the Performing Arts. Marjorie was previously artist in residence at Banff Playwrights Lab, Cahoots Theatre, Factory Theatre, Theatre Direct Canada, Tapestry New Opera, SUNY in New York, and Theatre de Piff in Hong Kong.
Can you speak on your experience as a woman of color in this industry?
Mindy Kaling has something that she said once that people say to her, like, "Oh, you seem confident." And she always replies like, "Why? Why do you think I shouldn't be confident? Because I'm a big woman? Because I'm brown? Because I'm a woman? Why shouldn't I be confident?" And so for young women of color, I think it's really important to understand your worth and to understand that, that you have something of value, and you should move through the world accordingly in that manner. And I know it's like, how do you craft that authentic voice? You won't get there unless you try. That's it. And it's like putting yourself out there so that you actually have an opportunity for something to shift, for something to change, to understand your aesthetic. You won't really understand it if you're all still thinking about it and you keep it all private to yourself and no one ever sees it. We don't call that theater, right? Like if no one ever sees it, what is it? If there's a theater show in the woods and no one sees it, what is it? I always say, if you're not failing sometimes, it means that you're not anywhere near the edge. That means you're in the center of your comfort zone and you're never pushing your own boundaries, right? And so you never really know what's actually possible and what the potential is in your work because you've never tried to push outside of it.
As a playwright and a librettist, where do you draw your inspiration from in creating new pieces of work?
There's an image, and it's usually ends up being the final image of the play or the final image before an epilogue. And I am lucky that the plays that I've been lucky to see, to fruition have been so because I've seen that image and I said, I'm going to get there. And then as a playwright, I have a goal. I know what that last image is. I know what that last scene is. The last scene of my first play by China Doll is almost exactly the same as when it was first written because I was like, and I wrote it first.
How do you think we can highlight female artists with an atmosphere of inclusivity for everyone? And I mean like gender, intersectionality, disability, so everybody is included and welcome.
It's a kind of idea that work made by women, stories made by women are not already ultimately universal. So there's something wrong with our society. First of all, that's something wrong about our society. That's very hard to fix, like us one at a time. It's very hard for us to systemically tear down everything. It's like it's exhausting. It's hard to tear it all down. Shadowpath is trying, I know. So I just wanted to kind of like unpack that and examine that. I think mine said like the real way to do it is to make sure that you're intentionally thinking the opposite. And the opposite is every woman's story is important and every woman's story is universal. Every woman's story is already inclusive. Someone I know that I trust very much, a dramaturg and director that I've worked with in the past, she always says that the universal is in the specific. So that the more that we know, the more that we share that story, the more that we know, the more vulnerable that we understand that story, and the more we're able to have empathy for that story and the potential for that story to be universal.
Our last committee session of the year brought one final classical play for consideration.
Here we are, and we're going to talk briefly about this first play written in the 1700s by Mary Picks called The Beau Defeated.
I had fun with this play, and I thought that it was still kind of socially relevant in a way, because it hasn't changed so much. Like on Facebook, everybody is just putting on their face, right? And they're all about liking and, oh, I like what you're wearing and don't you look so beautiful? And it's like, it's the same old bullshit. And society is like stuck in this adolescent phase.
I thought this was like a classic story of the time. It felt very like Oscar Wilde met Shakespeare, with the way like all the twists and turns. And halfway through, because I think the women, like the female characters, felt so much like stereotypes of themselves, I started to imagine it as a bunch of drag queen characters, and that all of the male characters were played by butch women, which was a lot of fun for my brain.
I didn't like it very much. I thought that there were some funny, like there were some humorous parts, but it was so long. I found it boring. I tried to like it. I didn't. This is definitely a meant to be seen and not read type of play. I think it could be funny if it was staged, like with all of the costumes and all of the physical humor and all of the, relationships in the silence.
I was really trying to like imagine how we could do it, because even if everything was fine and even if we had funding wasn't an issue, I would try to do it differently. Like I would try to do it site specific, or I'd try to make it super cool and digital in some way. So I'm thinking there's a lot of outdoor scenes in this play. Could we stage some in the woods? And then I also think that there's just better plays to do that with.
That concludes episode 5 of Toots Your Own Horn, documenting the creation of a new kind of classical play festival. Next time, we'll share some of our challenges and triumphs over the past 10 months as we pave new paths in the classical theater festival world. We'll also reveal our top selections for festival programming as we boldly go where no theater company has gone before, creating theater out of the shadows.